Welcome to the April meeting of the Capital Area World War II Roundtable. Okay. At this time, as part of our traditions, let's rise, and I will lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One of our members asked if there are any of our membership who have been Army Air Force Kriegsgefangener, prisoner of war, because he had a relative, a Sergeant Charles Androsky, who was a Kriegsgefangener, and I think it looks like Stammlager number 3, which is probably the Luftwaffe prison camp number 3. And he has some information here and thought that someone who had been a prisoner of war of the Germans might be able to answer some of his questions. I know we had some World War II B-17 and B-24 air crewmen who were guests of the Germans, but I don't particularly, offhand I don't see if we have any here tonight, but if any of you can provide any assistance, that would be appreciated. Now, most of you know that during peacetime, the Coast Guard was under the Department of Transportation. It was not always that way. Actually, during the 30s and up until the beginning of World War II, the United States Coast Guard is actually part of the Treasury Department. Actually, some of its cutters were named for famous secretaries of the Treasury. Now, however, there is a provision that whenever we are at war, the Coast Guard shifts from being under the Department of the Treasury to being the Department of the Navy, and it's one of the, it's a branch of the armed services all the time, but basically serves under the Department of the Navy at that time. Now, Coast Guardmen served in many areas throughout the world. Anything from some of the escort ships on the convoys to providing as far as navigation, also as far as being the crewman on a number of the landing craft. So it was a real varied situation. And we have one of our local people, Richard Evans, who is now Mannheim, but I understand was originally a local area person. And he's going to speak about his service in the Coast Guard. And he joined in September 1943. So, without further ado, I would like to have Richard come and tell us his story of being a member of the Coast Guard in World War II.
I thought maybe if I hid, somebody else would be able to talk. This will undoubtedly be the most boring presentation that's ever been made here. But I'll try to talk loud enough that you can hear me. Can everybody hear this? Okay, very good. If you got the mail out, and as it just said, I enlisted in the Coast Guard when I was 17. Was on my way to the Pacific when I was on my 18th birthday. I got discharged when I was 20 and had to wait 11 months before I was old enough to vote. Or drink beer legally. Now, according to this, it says that I was sent to the Loran School in Manhattan Beach. Well, that's not quite accurate. That time the Coast Guard had 3 boot camps, one in Curtis Bay, Maryland, one in Oakland, California, and one in Manhattan Beach in Brooklyn. I got sent to the one in Manhattan Beach. That has now been torn down, and there are 6 millionaires' houses where we used to be. It's different now. From there, they sent me to Boston to go to Loran School. Now, most people have to ask me, what's Loran? Very few people know. Loran stands for Long Range Navigation. It's navigational radar. Prior to having Loran, most navigation was done by what they call dead reckoning. And that was a case of where the navigating officer decided what direction he was going, what point he was following on the compass, and then they would say, okay, they're going up to one of those, on this one, and at the end of 4 or 5 hours, they'd take a reading to see where they were at. Now, that was fine when you had ships, because the ships were only doing 30 knots an hour, so at the end of 4 or 5 hours, they might have been off course by a very slight amount. But the problem was when they got airplanes, and they would be off course, they'd be way off course, and planes would start to disappear entirely. They'd take off, and nobody would ever hear from them again. So they had to come up with another system of navigation that aids to navigation, and they came up with radar. Now, radar prior to that was strictly search radar, and that was that they sent out a radar signal, a radio signal, and it would pick up a ship or a plane or something and show where it was at, and then they could take shots at it. Somebody come up with the idea that it would make sense to set this thing up and use it for navigation. So let me show you how that works. Get over here, draw a picture. The way Loran worked was that you had 3 stations, master and 2 slaves. The master would send out radar signals. Now, if you were at a ship and you picked up, let's say you were over here or in an airplane, you would measure the distance, not in distance, but in time. The amount of time it took for the master signal to come, followed by the slave signal. The way they did that was that the master sent the signals out, the slave picked them up and sent them back. But this made for what they call hyperbolas all around that way. So what you would do would be that you would measure the distance, or the time between the two. Now let's say that you measured with the northern slave, the master and the northern slave, and you come up with, let's say it was 150 microseconds. Now that means that the signals were 150 100,000ths of a second apart. And if you picked up 150, that meant that you were on a hyperbola here that showed where you were at 150. But you didn't know where you were on that hyperbola. So then you would take another signal off of the southern slave. And this would be also like this. And you would measure again the microsecond difference, and where those two crossed, that's where you were. And that was accurate to within a half a mile if you were within 300 miles of one of these stations. So that's why it became so important with airplanes, because they were no longer going to get lost. They knew where they were. Actually, when they said it was a half mile, it was closer than that. Because you were allowed, running these stations, you were allowed to be 2 microseconds apart. And what that meant was that the master sent out its slave, or out its signal, and the slave was supposed to send it back, and it was supposed to be within 2 microseconds of being accurate. Well, most of the time it was right on top of it. So that it was totally accurate, you knew exactly where you were. But what they did to make this work, the first place they set up Moran, and incidentally this all came under the Coast Guard because it was aids to navigation. The first ones were built here in the North Atlantic. That was because the North Atlantic was the toughest place in the world to navigate. What people don't realize is that, when you hear about Pearl Harbor and all the damage that was done, when the war started, here's where the damage was being done. The German U-boats were sinking boats like crazy all along here. I saw a picture one time, 2 maps, and they showed a map, and they had an X. Each place a ship sank prior to World War II. And then, beside it, they had another map showing another X and how many there were at the end of World War II. And this entire area was just covered with X's. This meant that the real problem here was navigation and convoys. And the convoys, the Navy took the convoys out of Boston mostly and Halifax, Nova Scotia. And they go up through here and land somewhere up here in northern New England. They would only have, a convoy could only move at the speed of the slowest ship. So it wouldn't matter how fast the fast ones were, if you had a scow or some sort of a tanker or something that could only do 10 or 12 knots, that meant the entire convoy had to slow down to 10 or 12 knots. And protecting it was terrible. Most of the protection they got with a convoy of, let's say, 100 ships, there'd be 5 or 6 Navy ships taken. So most of their protection came from airplanes. The ships would report the presence of the airplanes, and the airplanes would come and bomb the subs. Now the problem was that right in here, in that section between Greenland and Iceland, there were no planes. There was no plane that could fly in there and still drop bombs. So that section became known as Torpedo Junction. Never once in the entire war did a convoy go through Torpedo Junction that it didn't come under an attack from the submarines. There were 2 or 3 times that they were able to get through that no ships got sunk. But every convoy that ever went through there during the war got attacked. The Coast Guard, their job was to take the convoys from here to here and back again. And all they did was a convoy over and convoy back. I once talked to a guy who told me that he was on a a boat there, that there was so much traffic going through there, that they over and back for 6.5 weeks, they never once left their gun stations. They ate standing at the guns. They went to the toilet over the side. They didn't take a bath for 6 weeks. Just back and forth one way and the other. Now, to try to help that out was why they also wanted to build the Loran up here, so that boats could follow their own signals that you showed over there and get from one place to the other. So the first place they built it was the North Atlantic. Then they built another chain down here that went from Newfoundland. The master station was on Nantucket Island, and the Southern Slave was in South Carolina. So they would follow that. Then they built a chain in here on the Pacific, and then they built a chain down here in the Aleutians. And all of this was for the same thing, to let planes and ships take a reading. Then they built a chain right here around Hawaii. And then the very first one they built south of the Atlantic, or south of the equator, was what they called the Phoenix chain, which was right in here. And that's the one I was stationed. We were on the first one south of the equator. I'll show you a little bit more of that later. As the war moved west, they built more chains here in the Marshalls and over into the Indonesian, the Philippines, and they were building them for the attack on Japan. And that was the Loran for the whole world. Loran now is obsolete. They take their readings off of satellites. But at that time, that was the beginning of it. Now, need to make sure I got here that. Okay. Now, I went to boot camp in Manhattan Beach and asked to go to radar school. And so they assigned me to radar school. So we get down, we get on the truck, they took us up to Boston. And there we found out we were going to be signed up to go to MIT. Because MIT, meanwhile, had developed Loran. Now, we had a fellow in here talking a couple months ago, and he was saying that radar and Loran were secret. Well, radar was not secret. Search radar was well known throughout the country. The British had it for a long time. But when we signed up and went to MIT, we went into a special building, and they told us, okay, you're in Loran, you're in radar, but not search radar, you're in Loran. Loran stands for Long Range Navigation. The first thing you have to know is it's secret. You may not mention the word Loran outside of this building. If you do, you can be deported. And the second thing we learned was that once you were in, you could never get out. So by the time we were there, we knew where we were going to be the rest of the war. We were going to be at Loran Station someplace. So that's what we were doing. Now, now what they did when they took this measurement to the seconds, and you would get on one of these lines, they were called hyperpoles, and where they matched each other, that's where you were. And here is a picture, I'll pass it around, the chart that they put out showing the hyperbole. And this particular one shows it for the island that I was on, which was Gardner Island and Baker Island. So you can see there that the way they had to match those up, pass that around, make sure I get it back. And that's what they had to do. And they read that thing, and that told them where they were. And that's how they spent it. Now, okay, now, let me show you what we had to do, where you ran a rad station. As your Loran equipment. Now, Loran was the first use of what we now call how many of you are carrying telephones with you?
GPS.
Yeah, telephone. Everything on it is automatic. The whole thing is controlled by a chip. When this first started, the entire system had to be run by hand. A Loran timer, where you were timing radio signals. The Loran timer was about from here to that thing right there. It stood about 8 foot high. Your chip now takes the place of all of that. So that's a promise. Well, that's what we had to do, was run those things by hand and make them work out. Now, the way you had to do that was that you had a scope and you had a mark on it like that and another like that. Off of each of these, this is where your signal went up. So when you looked at the scope, you had a master signal and a slave signal. Now, the way you had to run that was, you put those two together on top of each other, and you spread them out. And then you had another signal that looked like this. Now this is those two signals set on top of each other so that you could measure how far apart they were. On the island that I was on, let me get these in here. Baker Island, Anafu, and Gardner. That was the chain that I operated, that I was an operator on. I didn't operate it all alone. What you would do would be to send out this signal, put them on top of each other, and make sure they never move apart. Now, I want to demonstrate what we had to do. If I can find it. When you went on duty, you measured how far part these signals were. Now, between us and the master, the northern master, the one I passed around, the difference was 388 microseconds. So the first thing you did when you went on watch was you put these two signals on top of each other, came up with this, and made sure they were 388 microseconds apart.
How
Yeah.
far is 380 microseconds?
I haven't the faintest idea. The stations were about almost 400 miles apart. And incidentally, anybody else got any questions, don't hesitate to ask me. I'm just trying to get this filled in. Yeah, that's about how far apart they were. So that when you took that signal, you were measuring that. And we were measuring at the station to make sure that the northern slave was 488 microseconds apart by being on top. Now, I want to demonstrate what we did to make that work.
Working
Any
good.
questions?
How did we win the war?
Yeah. That was it. You looked at that green line for 4 hours. If the thing moved more than 2 microseconds apart, you turned the signal through a switch, and the signal went on and off the air. At that point, the slave turned on his blinker. You turned yours off at the master. The slave blinked on and off until he was back where he belonged. And the ships and the planes were told to not try to take a signal while the blinkers worked. Wait until they're lined up. This would happen on an average in a 4-hour watch, maybe 3 times. We once went 7 weeks with our southern slave, but the green line never moved once. So we went on duty and looked at the green line for 4 hours. That was the tough part. Yeah, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. And the 4 hours you sat and looked at the green line. That was my contribution to the defeated Japanese. Have a little applause. That was it. Now, the trick of the thing was, where we were, on Gardner Island. There's a picture of Gardner Island. It is about 2 miles long, probably half a mile wide. Big lagoon in the center of that. The Moran station is down here on the tip. But the only place in the island big enough for our 600 foot base. It had to be there.
Were there any natives on this island?
There were natives on the island up in here. There were about 40 of them put there by New Zealand. There was a church group put in there by New Zealand to establish sovereignty. We were under strict instruction to not ever go to the native base except when there was an official visit, which was about maybe, well, we were there for 17 months. We made maybe 5 visits. Twice we had them down to show them movies. And the rest of the time, they were up and we were down.
Where were you on that map? Where was the station on that map? What about Baker Island? Did that have Baker Island?
Baker,
Yeah, right.
only the Loran station. Atatu was our southern slave. They had a big Navy station there, and they were right next to it. They practically, I won't say lived, but they were pretty close to it.
Were they all owned by New Zealand, all those three?
No, Baker was owned by the United States. New Zealand owned the other two. They are now, these two are part of, what's the name of your country? Kiribati. Now part of Kiribati. Pacific nation of Kiribati.
How many members still living there at this place?
On the base,
Yes.
running the base. Right there they are. All 27 of us. So you had 27 guys, and you better get along with them. Yeah.
The Germans or Japanese suspect that you guys are doing something, and constant signals coming in, that something's going on.
Interesting you should ask, because as we started, as I said when I started, we were told this is secret. You're not allowed to mention it. Then we got over there and found out that they had built these ones up here and were building them over there. We found out also that when the Japanese attacked the Aleutians, there was a land station at the furthest tip, and they bypassed that and charged in here. So never once, and that's why that we were told we had to keep it a secret, so that the Japanese wouldn't try to knock us out. Our orders were that in the event of a submarine attack, they had to do was blow up the Moran timers and get captured. Never was ever was a Moran station attacked or bombed by the Japanese.
Were they huge towers or something?
Like that?
The master display, they huge towers like a
Yep.
cell phone tower?
Yeah, they were just regular radio towers, 100 foot up. And there it sat. So they would have been easy to do. One time while we were there, we got a notice that there was an unidentified submarine in the air. And then we had to walk down the other end of the island and see if anybody was around, and they weren't. And then twice we had somebody saw there. And then we had to get out. Now, the interesting part of that was the Coast Guard used to give us night blindness tests. Everybody was tested for night blindness. I had the third highest night blindness score that ever went through boot camp. So I had the highest night blindness score on the island. So that when we were going down to the other end, now, the pictures you're seeing there, they're being passed around. There is one guy on it as an ensign. There's 3 first-class petty officers, one's a cook, one's a radio man, one's a radar man. The radio man was the executive officer. Now, when we heard that there was a flare down here, they would send, the main group would go down the ocean side, and under the cook, McDonald, they would send another scouting party down this side. I always had to go with this one because it was pitch black, and I could see better than any of the others. But never did any of those stations ever come under attack. Now, the interesting part was that about 10 years after the war was over, the word came out that the reason the Japanese never knocked out one of those stations was they were taking their navigation signals off of the making arrangements that the next time I go to Tokyo for the Tokyo Round Table, I'll be giving this presentation to the Japanese.
How many stations did you have in the Pacific, and how many in the Atlantic?
How many what?
How many stations
Stations?
in the Pacific and in the Atlantic?
You heard them all when I listed them there. Up until the war was over. Then they kept putting it in. So you had a chain here, 2 chains here, 2 here, and 3 here.
That's all there were.
That's all there were was the war was over. And there were 6 and 7 operators on each island. And the way he operated was that the master station, you looked at this thing here and made sure it didn't move. At the slave station, they had to keep adjusting it by hand. And there you had one guy spend his time looking at the green line and adjusting the knob, and the other guy kept the law. Then you had at the 4th station, which was the headquarters station, there you had one guy that looked to make sure they were being kept in line. So there were always 4 guys looking at each of the green lines to make sure they stayed in. That's me. Yeah. Fourth from the left in the top floor. Top right.
Any of the stations,
That's when I had black hair.
did any of the stations have women?
No. Never any women in either.
In your 17 months on the island, did you ever have a chance to leave the island? And also, what was resupply like being so isolated?
We got mail once a month. We were supposed to get it once a week, but that meant that they had, PBY had to fly it in, Navy PBY had to fly it in, and the pilot didn't want to come down here because after the first 2 or 3 trips, with nothing to look at, he found some reason not to come. So we ended up, we once went 6 weeks without mail, but we began to screw and holler, so then they began to bring it once a month. That was mail, yeah. Your question of supplies, we got diesel fuel 2 times while we were there. And that meant, I see, there was nowhere to land on here. This is just a coral reef. And the way we had to bring the diesel fuel in was the boat would pull up here. They would throw barrels of diesel oil out into the water, tie them together with a line, and they would tow them into us, throw us the line, and we'd pull ashore. So we only had to do that twice, thank God. When the mail would come, they'd usually bring us something to eat. The main problem here, the food was terrible.
Did you have a kitchen?
Like that?
Did you have a mess hall or kitchen?
That kitchen, yeah,
You had cooks,
and cooks,
and you had food.
and food. Yep.
You didn't have to catch your own. You didn't have to catch your own fish.
Well, you could catch your own fish. One of the things you got to get into your head here is that with 27 guys like this, for a year and a half, you turn your brain off. The only way to survive is just wipe out the world. And you didn't go fishing, you didn't do nothing. I mean, our food amounted to, every morning for breakfast, we got either pancakes or powdered eggs. For lunch, we always got canned meat and vegetable hash. For supper, 6 nights a week, 3 nights we'd have spaghetti. The cooks went out of their way to try to give us a good meal on Sunday afternoon.
This explains to me what happened to you.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Sounds like that was very fresh water. We couldn't. We got mail once a month. That meant 30, 40 letters. We wrote to everybody we ever heard of. And we'd get 30 or 40 letters each time the mail came. And then you'd sit down to write, and what the hell are you gonna write? We couldn't mention Loran, we couldn't tell where we were, we couldn't say anything that was happening. But about 10 years after we were married, my mother gave me a box of letters that I had written home to her and she had saved. And she said the one on top's the one we were worried about. So as soon as I opened it, I knew which one it was. Because one Sunday night, I sat down to write her a letter, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, what the hell am I going to write? And a guy come out of the galley and gave each of us an apple. And that night I wrote 7.5 pages to describe eating an apple. That's the one she was worried about. It was typical. If you read the letter that we wrote, you say, oh, well, it rained today or it didn't rain. That was it.
Did you hear from your brother Bob?
I got 2 letters from Bob.
You knew he was overseas?
Yep. I got one from him right after he got wounded. And,
He didn't tell you about me at all?
no.
I got this kid.
Yeah.
What do you do for fresh water?
Fresh water. We had a way to turn salt water into fresh water. But what we did was, on the base, we had 6 Quonset huts. And they were hooked up with rain spouts. And every time it rained, the water would run in and fill up the cistern. And when it rained, it rained. It didn't rain very often, but when it rained, it rained. As a matter of fact, when it rained, we were very short on fresh water. We were very limited as to how many showers we could take. One of the rules was that if it rains and anybody completes taking a shower in the rain, nobody else could take a shower. So that's how we saved the water. So what would happen would be when we'd see the clouds coming over, we'd all be standing out there naked, waiting for the rain to hit. Try to get soaked up and then washed down. That was the end of that for the day.
Did you ever wear a full uniform over there?
Oh my God, no. The picture that's there, that's the way we dressed all the time.
On your position of 3 Loran stations, how do you know if you're on the right of it or the left of it? You know, you could have like a mirror image of his time.
Yeah, well, that you had to learn how to read the sheet that I passed around. They would code that different.
Well, you could tell from that.
Yeah. Now, they did tell us that there were times when they got mixed up as to which side they were on. But that would have been a difference of a couple of hundred miles. So they could figure that out.
Did you have any entertainment?
What's that?
Did you have any entertainment?
Any entertainment? Well, yeah. We read poems to each other.
You had a radio.
We had, no, not radio. We had, all of our radios were dictons. Nothing. 3 times they sent us movies.
Oh, you got movies.
We got 3 movies.
Did you have a projector?
Yeah.
Okay.
And on that occasion, we got the 3 movies. We had them for a month. We showed them every night for a month. And at the end of the month, they came and took 2 of them away and left the 3rd one. And a month later, they brought 1 of them back and took the other.
What were the 3 movies?
I have it the favorite.
You don't remember them?
No. The only thing I remember was that one had Spike Jones. And that one we would show 3 or 4 times a night.
What was your reaction when you first saw your first woman after 10
Brother. As a matter of fact, that would have been at Canton when we were flying home. It's quite a sight. We got off of that, they took us, there's another thing. get out there, they told us we'd be there 12 months. Well, at the end of 14 months, we were still there. So they sent in, the skipper sent in and asked, when are we getting to leave? And they said, 12 months. And he said, back then, we're ready here 14. So then they come up, and the best officer in the Coast Guard was Commander Hancock. He was in charge of aids to navigation in the Pacific. And he said those guys are coming back up here for 30 days leave. So after a year, he was supposed to go back to Hawaii for 30 days leave and then go back out to another island for the rest of the time. And then he came down on an inspection tour, which meant he came on a weekend. And that's the time I got to be. They put myself and another guy named Kansky on the point, then we went back to Canton. And Hancock flew on back to Hawaii. And when we got back to Hawaii on a boat, I said to the guy that was unloading our stuff onto the truck, I said, do you have any idea where we're going next trip? And he said, you guys are going home. God, you know, what brought that on? And so I went in and something came up and the guys, well, they cut out our livery after 30 days. But my dad at that time was working at Hickman Field. So I had an excuse to get an extra day's liberty because he was going to take me out to dinner. And the guy was going to go see Hancock. So when I went in to see Hancock, I told his secretary, ma'am, why I wanted to see him, because they took away our liberty. And then he come back, he said, you're all set, your liberty's back on again. And I was he said, wait a minute, Hancock wants to talk to you. So I went into Hancock's office, he said, sit down. So I sat down and he started asking me questions. And all kinds of questions. Like and when I left, I said, what brought all that on? And this guy says, Hancock came back, he said, I don't care what headquarters said, those guys are going home. Well, after looking at the island down there, 27 guys looking at each other like, he said, you're going home. Yeah.
Did they maintain them after the war for further navigation, or how long did they last?
About 2 years after the war was over, they tore down that chain, and they tore down a couple of the other chains. Now it's obsolete. Moran is out of the question. They want to turn them all down now. They take their signals off the satellites. So they don't take it reverse. Yes.
Newspapers, magazines, you get into those?
Oh, yeah. Well, we got mail once a month, so they subscribe to Time Life Newsweek, and I forget the fourth one, I didn't read that one. But when the mail come, we get 4 or 5 copies of it. And I read every one of them coming forward. And I got the Hummelstown Sun. Every time I get 3 or 4 copies of that, everybody on the island was reading the Hummelstown Sun. That's the main thing we did was read. You know, 2 or 3 times I remember we tried to hit each other baseball. One time we played softball, or football. But again, you got to remember everybody had to turn their brain. Each group it had 3 or 4 buddies, and that's who you were with. The rest of them were there, and we got along. And the ones who didn't, just like the officer in charge. He played bridge. So he had 3 guys that were his bridge partners. And one of the things we had was a ping pong table. And
No ball.
but this officer ordered that in the evening after 7 o'clock, we weren't allowed to play ping pong because it interrupted his game.
Too much noise.
Too much noise. So the rest of the time we were there, when he came in the room, we'd go out. That's the way we did it. The whole.
You have a medical doctor.
No, we had a first class,
Whatever it's called.
yeah, that's it.
No psychiatrist.
Now, the trick was that they would come down from Canton and inspect our teeth. And if you had cavities, you had to come back up to Canton and have your cavities fixed. So that meant you were going for a month. Couldn't clean teeth. I was one of the 2 guys on the island that never had a cavity.
Parking lot. I bet you parking lot.
Yeah, and the rest of them, that's the way they went.
Where's Canton?
Canton, on this map, there we are. Would be right in here, I don't see it, would be right in about there.
Well,
Huh?
what island group is it?
Phoenix. Phoenix chain. And Canton that was the big base nearby. The Army, the Navy, and the Marines all had bases on Canton. And then
Even after you had storms, do you ever get hit by a real severe storm, like one of the subtropical hurricanes?
Monsoon.
never got hit by a monsoon. When it would rain, and then it would disappear. We didn't get any more rain for a couple of weeks.
I have one comment and one question.
Yeah.
My comment is, years ago, I read a book on Alfred Reed.
What was that again?
I read a book on Alfred Reed. And in the introduction, it said that the bomb might have snuck before, but radar won before. So I think you're nice. And my question is,
Well, I guess,
That's a question.
yeah, like, I went to, I mentioned it earlier, but I was just someplace where they had veterans together and they were asking each of us to give a little rundown. I was the last guy to talk and they said, keep it short. And I said, I can tell you in 4 words what my contribution was. They said, what's that? And I said, utter and complete boredom.
She got another question.
my question is there a technical reason or scientific reason why the planes have been flying with bombs?
Yeah, they didn't have enough. The question was, why couldn't the planes fly between Iceland and Greenland with bombs? And at that stage, they didn't have planes big enough or strong enough to haul all the way. Who made the equipment? No, it wasn't Bengals. I couldn't tell you. The only thing we knew was the green line, and I don't know what they did.
Sony.
Well, I think you've been bored long enough now.
You call that a sine wave, right?
Yeah.
The wave is a sine wave.
Any other questions? Yep. Yeah, no, we had, well, when first set up, we had 2 AC generators and 1 DC generator. And then they come in, took the DC out, put the 2 AC in. And that was exciting because for the whole week, the strangers were there. Too late.
Did you eat part of your food?
Yeah, we ate constantly. Canned meat and vegetable mash. Every lunch. That was it. The pity, the guys, you had to pity the most of the cooks. Because everybody was bitching about what we had to eat. It was
many years was it till you could touch spam again?
I got so used to eating it, I still eat it.
I was going to put up a kind of rain for it. He was doing it around the top of the mountain. He said he had to stay and get turned off the first one.
We didn't do nothing.
That's up.
But, yeah. Put that up there, you notice it's part of the Earhart project is where that came from. The trick was that, yeah, how many of you ever heard of an outfit called Tiger? The International Group for Historic Aircraft Company. And they have, well, they first started hunting Amelia Earhart after the war, not before the war. There were 3 places here, one in Midway, one in Wake, and one in Hawaii, that had taken bearings on her radio broadcast after she crashed. And all 3 of those crossed at Gardner Island. So the rumor was that that's where she crashed. She wasn't there with you. And it's a shame that they didn't tell us back when we were there, because we'd have had time to go out around that island with a rake. Hours knocking my brother Bob asked one time to describe an average day, and I did. He said, thank God I didn't get involved in that. I just said, he got wounded. But, I mean, it did nothing. If you're on the 4-to-8 watch, which I was for 3 months, they woke you up at 3:45 in the morning. You drank a cup of coffee that had been brewing for 22 hours. You went on watch and watched the green line for 4 hours. And at that time, you went to breakfast, had your pancakes, and then you generally hit the sack. And you'd sleep till about 11. 11 o'clock, you get up, go over to the galley, have another cup of coffee, it was only 6 hours old. And you sit around and chew the fat. And you'd have lunch, which was the Spain. And then the afternoon was when you had off. And once in a while, maybe 2-3 times a week, we get out swimming down here. It was totally boring. There was nothing there. There was nobody around. Mostly you read. What was the climate like? 4 o'clock, you went back on watch. At 5:30, they had to relieve you, eat supper. You came off at 8, and then you would have to sit around and eat that kind of stuff.
You can always put it in there.
And that's what you did. Day after day for 17 months. Yeah.
Did you swim in the lagoon or the ocean? What was the coral?
You always swim in the ocean. Or in the lagoon. Yeah. There were sharks in the ocean and not in the lagoon. So we swam.
You never have a payday.
Payday? No.
Okay.
But you say you didn't play poker then, did you?
Anyway.
Some of the guys did, but we never got paid the whole time they were there. There was nowhere to spend it.
You had a good bank.
Huh?
You had a good bank.
Oh, yeah, the first pay I got after I got out of there was back up in Canton. A couple $100 I got all in one shot. But I saved money while I was out.
What was the tobacco supply like?
Tobacco?
Yeah, you had a lot of cigarettes to play poker?
Yeah, they had cigarettes.
Did you even play poker with those?
Yeah, yeah, I didn't.
Did you
Yeah,
get promoted?
we first got there, When we first got the Canton, they issued everybody 2 packs of cigarettes a day, free. And I didn't smoke, so I traded mine for beer. But the rest of the guys, that's it.
How many buildings were in the place where you were? How many buildings?
Buildings,
Yeah.
6 Quonset huts we lived in and 1 for the Loran station. That's it.
7 buildings.
7 buildings. Yeah.
For your activity center, you said you had a big radio, you had sheet along cable, that was the orientation.
That was a half of it. There were 2 buildings for supplies. And we moved all the supplies out of half of the building. It was a pretty exciting time, I tell you. It was, when you hear people, when I come to these meetings, and I hear people talk about their contribution to the war, I always try to hide in the back. 'Cause that was mine. That was mine right there. Church service. Okay. Very good.
Routine duties, but important duties. And you also gave us a very good explanation as far as what, Loran, because, I mean, I heard of it. To me, it was a name and navigation, that was about it. Now, of course, we have a tradition here, and Bill's not here, so we are missing the medic steel pot.
Jack, I got one. Jack, I got one.